Hey, welcome back to my channel. I wanted to do a kind of a quick recap video, kind of processing my thoughts and looking over my work from 2025 now that the year's over. I know it's a little into January, but I was specifically waiting until I had a certain project in hand to make this video and then kind of show things off. And that book arrived yesterday, so I've got everything set up here. Want to start flipping through. If you haven't been to this channel before, or not really familiar with my work, I used to draw a lot when I was younger. Kind of stopped after I finished up school, kind of was moving out and living on my own. When you're out in the working world, it's hard to just kind of get a lot of time for yourself. And a lot of your hobbies and things that you're interested in, they do tend to suffer because of that. In my case, like I've always loved drawing. I've drawn for as long as I can remember. My parents and family have stories of when I was a little kid, one or two even, drawing, just scribbling away on stuff. But somewhere along the line, I kind of just stopped doing it. But then I got back into drawing and stuff during the pandemic and coming off of some personal medical issues. I was hanging out with like an old friend who I hadn't seen in a while, and I said, "Hey, like I haven't drawn in like years at this point, maybe a decade and a half. Like, why don't we just sit down and doodle and stuff?" So he busted out some loose sheets of paper, some sketchbooks. Here we're going to be looking at like the 2024, 2025 sketchbook. And we started doodling. He showed me a couple things that he had learned. He's actually a pretty skilled artist. And it was kind of returning to that, like it kind of like clicked back with me. And I realized that like I just love kind of picking up a pen, picking up a pencil, just kind of doodling, digging into projects, doing different things. And so from kind of lockdown time, I want to say 2019 up until 2024, 2023, I was mostly just, drawing 20 minutes, 30 minutes every day, a little bit here and there. Then I got a little more serious as I was moving on to 2023, 2024. But one kind of issue that came up with putting the time aside and drawing was I realized I was only really kind of drawing these one-off illustrations or doing a lot of doodling, and I was not doing a ton of projects. And I think at the end of, I want to say 2024, I kind of made the conscious effort that in 2025 I was going to be at least dipping my toes into, if not completely finished illustrations as much as possible. Then I wanted to try something new, try and branch out a bit. And one of the things that I've always been really interested in is like, can I make a comic book? If you're an illustrator or a painter or anyone interested or into visual arts, there's always kind of this thought in the back of your mind that like maybe I could make my own book, maybe I can make my own comic. But the thing no one really tells you is that comic making, it's first of all, it's extremely difficult and extremely time consuming. But there's not a lot of good resources out there. And because it's kind of a hybrid medium between writing and drawing, if you're really into drawing, but you don't know anything about writing, the writing aspect can hold you back. If you don't know anything about drawing, but you're really into writing, then the drawing aspect can hold you back. So usually recommendations that you'll see online all the time are like, oh, if you're a writer, just go find an artist. Just go find somebody to draw for you. And if you're an artist, just go find a writer. And I do personally like to write. I did a little bit of writing in college, and I found that it's a pretty fun activity, but I'm not the kind of person who can sit down for extended periods and clack away at a keyboard. I found that the actual struggle of getting words out onto paper is way more difficult for me than just sitting down and drawing. But thankfully there is comics, which are like a hybrid medium. So here we go. We're in my 2025 sketchbook. I would occasionally pull up pieces from different comics and different pictures that I had saw or different videos and try and copy them into here. But you know, I always had this this kind of thought in the back of my mind, like, yeah, you know, I can make a comic, and I think a lot of people get that idea, but it never quite goes anywhere for whatever reason. So I really started to kind of push myself to like dig further into how do I actually, like, nuts and bolts, how do I make a comic, and then can I actually do it? And so I first started off by doing a couple short 4-panel strips, really basic stuff, kind of like a setup, development of like a problem or characters, and then kind of like a weird kind of ironic twist or kind of like occurrence that happens and then a conclusion to it. I like the 4-panel setup. It kind of just fits how I approach things writing. I tried working on 3 panels. Anything less than 2 is kind of falls further back into the illustration territory, so I wasn't as interested in that. But yeah, I spent some time, you know, watching kind of like the YouTube videos everybody online always sees. You know, how to start your comic this year, how to get motivated to do that. And so I absorbed a lot of that info, joined a small group online. I kind of traded some different sketches and pictures and stuff back and forth, and got some kind of initial feedback, and that was pretty helpful. The people online, they were more interested in like webtoon stuff, and I'm not really into webtoons. I'm not the biggest fan of digital medium. I definitely prefer having like the tactile, physical book, physical paper. But it was just kind of cool being in an environment of, you know, people, shared interest, doing the same kind of stuff, even if the projects themselves are the same. And then randomly, the YouTube algorithm served up a channel, kind of defunct now, but it was called, I think, Power to the Panel. And it was kind of an my initial thoughts of it were like, okay, this is going to be kind of like another one of these videos where it's a lot of talking, but not a lot of like nuts and bolts on how to do it. And those videos I think are fine. And they can kind of serve as like ambient noise while you draw. But I did like, I like some of the content as it was coming out, and I started chatting with the people in the group, and some of the people in the group were talking about, oh, you know, we're going to put together like just little projects. We're going to put together an anthology and stuff. And so initially I thought like that'll be cool. Like I'll kind of just keep an eye on things and see how stuff goes. Because in art circles, in writing and drawing circles, there's a lot of people who talk about, you know, I'm going to do this project. It's, you know, it's in development. And honestly, like 90% of those projects don't really go anywhere. The remaining 10%, they do go somewhere, but they might not be open to a collaboration or even open to like having people hop on board. And so it was kind of in the back of my mind that, oh yeah, like this group over here is kind of doing some stuff. Like I'll kind of, you know, keep an eye on things. And all the while I'm drawing, I'm reading comics, like playing video games and stuff. And then they actually dropped the first project that they had worked on, which is this book. I'll grab it real quick. This book here is called Otaku no Gaijin. This is the first volume. It's a 3-part series, and this covers the history of anime's introduction to the Western market, and kind of like the 80s Western fan base's response to that. And the general setup is that you have kind of like a central writer who fleshes out like a script. You have kind of a through line with like some minor characters here and there, and then 20 or so odd artists who would be responsible for an individual page within the span of, I think, 48 hours or over the weekend, basically. Everybody completed their pages, sent them in. This is all compiled together by a book designer and then uploaded onto Mixum or another like self-publishing platform, and basically published. Everyone's given access to the link, and it's kind of at that point, it's like you can print it off, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. But for me personally, I have always really loved anime fandom. There's something like very genuine about a lot of people's approach to it, how people interact with characters, their medium or the media that they consume. Like, I've always been pretty fascinated by it, but also the art that comes out of it is really it's just really intriguing. Like people who cosplay, people who are really big into AMVs. Like, I've always really looked up to people like that. I've thought like that's it's a fun creative outlet that people like at the time in the 80s and 90s and even into like the 2000s, they may not have been monetarily kind of encouraged, but they're doing it anyways, and like I've always liked that. And so this volume came out, volume 1. I ended up hitting up one of the artists, the artist who did the, I want to say the Animatrix piece. No, actually the Megazone piece towards the beginning. I ended up hitting up this guy, Jason Schoonover, and I said, hey, like, give me a copy of that, and then like if you have any other like small zines or anything, send them my way. So he did. I think his thing ended up costing me, the total package was roughly 25 to 30. So it came with this, a couple other zines, a print, and then like a hand-drawn piece that he did, which was pretty cool. So I thought, I was looking at this book, and I started thinking, well, there's nothing in here from a technical standpoint that I couldn't replicate or at least match. And the only thing that's kind of holding me back in that regard of being able to complete a project is like, I don't understand the format that it's printed in. I don't understand how the project itself is put together once all the art's completed. So I started to have a lot of questions and started to kind of look at things in a more analytical view. Started to kind of take in like page turns, the actual spreads, the composition that different artists were working with. And I ended up hitting them up and saying, hey, like if, I know this is projects just came out, but if you guys are open, like, can I hop in on volume 2? And the guy who was in charge of it said, yeah, like, we're planning on putting together volume 2. I think it was a follow-up within, a couple weeks after. So we got the, basically the list of different series that were going to be covered in volume 2. And in this one specifically, I was able to pick out the Neon Genesis, the End of Evangelion, which is a movie that I've quite enjoyed over the years. The series itself is pretty legendary. I don't really need to explain that. I do consider End of Eva kind of on the level of something like a 2001 Space Odyssey, just in terms of its like visual impact, its aesthetics, its cultural impact too. And at the time it came out, a lot of people didn't really understand the series or had questions about it. And then because of that kind of misunderstanding of what the series was going for, the movie came out, and there was kind of I would say, an initial kind of acceptance that like, yeah, this is like a really great movie, but there's still a lot of confusion around like what exactly is going on here. But just to hop back a step real quick, volume 1 covers the VHS era, as VHSs and OVAs start to trickle in from Japan over to the States and Canada and I think South America. And volume 2 specifically covers DVDs. Here we got the volume 2 subtitle, The Digital Revolution. So when we're talking digital stuff, we're talking like the big Studio Ghibli style movies that were coming out in like the mid to late 90s, 2000s. And when I got the opportunity to work on this, I spent the weekend drawing it, and I got access to the print link for the book a week or two after or whatever. And what really helped me out was actually physically being able to hold the project in my hand and see how it was printed out, and then compare it to my iPad version, which I use because this is digital. There is something to say about when you start comics, because you don't really know how to problem solve all the different problems that come up, and there are a ton of different problems that come up. You really don't get a sense of whether or not the project was accomplished until the very end, when it's physically in your hand. Because when I was drawing this, I had all sorts of questions. I had questions about the layout, questions about how much information should I be telling. I was kind of working off a script, but then I didn't really want to be like literal to the script. Like, I kind of wanted to interject my own stuff, which is why we have like the little fanboy here screaming at the giant Ano head in the background. I wanted to kind of interject like kind of my own take onto the movie, because I do like to write and draw kind of more humorous stuff, and the movie itself is pretty dark. The script that I was working with kind of tended to focus on that darker aspect and the reaction of the fan base. And I also had a question of like, when you lay out a composition, what am I doing here? I kind of went with this, which is I think a fairly safe composition, and I started to notice a lot of other people for their first times kind of did something similar. So like a longer horizontal establishing shot, then you get a couple smaller shots, and then like your bigger emphasis panel. Other people, they may have variations on that, but this is kind of like a common theme that I started to notice. And then paying attention to that, it kind of opens up further possibilities down the road of like, hey, when I'm working on a project or working on a comic, like, how can I adjust my paneling to be a little more interesting? And so this project came out and, completed my page over the weekend. I think my piece was done within 24 hours. So the project itself was wrapped up within 48. And I was ready to go for the next one. I was thinking like just give me something, like I want to work on something else. Like, that was manageable. It was pretty exciting. It was actually a lot of fun. And then I was asking around in the group like, hey, like, do you guys have anything else? And nobody at the time really had anything. So I started kind of brainstorming like what kind of project can I be working on my own? So I scripted out a small Spider-Man bootleg project, which right now is sitting at 40 pages, 36 of which are penciled and inked. All of them are penciled. I just have to finish inking them. And that has kind of been my background project for the last year, where every day I'll do at least a panel a day, sometimes a panel and a half, or kind of depending on my work schedule. I might jump around. I might be able to render out a couple more panels more, or during the summer this last year, I had to leave town for a bit, so I wasn't able to work on it at all. But the Spider-Man project is kind of coming to completion. I'm still working on it. That'll definitely get into the 2026 stuff when I start covering that. But in the meantime, the group in particular was the K-Fam. And the K-Fam kind of was like, I'd say like a loose collection or loose grouping of artists who came out of the Cartoonist Kayfabe YouTube channel. And I was not familiar at all with Cartoonist Kayfabe. I had to look up what kayfabe even meant. I had never heard of the hosts Ed and Jim before. I had really no idea, and initially like no real interest in it, because Cartoonist Kayfabe you know, it was a channel which kind of abruptly ended, I want to say roughly around April of 2024. But they had started sometime in the 2020s. And they covered Old Wizard magazine and Western comics. And it's not that I don't like those kinds of things. It's just I don't have the biggest interest in like superhero comics, which I think was like 80% of their content. Although through this group, I did realize that Cartoonist Kayfabe actually had a pretty big selection of manga coverage. And I thought that's cool because like I'll play this in the background while I'm drawing, doing different things. So I started getting into watching Cartoonist Kayfabe. I would toss on one of their videos, kind of listen to this kind of background banter, and then go about either doodling or working on like smaller projects here and there. And then another project came up. We just looked at 1 and 2 of Otaku no Gaijin. This was the last in the series, number 3. So this is further into the year. I was fortunate enough to get the Kill la Kill piece in here, actually towards the end of it. But this one is same general idea, the kind of Western reception to anime and manga as it became a lot more popular in the 2000s up to like, I want to say the last series is 2014. So same general idea, a lot of really cool series and a lot of really cool work in this. We got a nice centerfold piece right there. So while these projects were going on also, there was kind of another spin-off group, which was like an older group, like older age-wise, like we're basically a bunch of boomers. They were interested in putting together a little fanzine, kind of parodying 1980s morning cartoons and shows and stuff. And the guy who was in charge of that group, like he ended up DMing me, being like, "Hey, we're putting this little project together. Like, you want in on it?" And initially, I was thinking like, I don't really have it. Like, I want to, but I don't have anything prepared. So I said, like, let me get back to you. If I come up with something in a week, like, I'll let you know. Let me grab the issue of it. So I did actually come up with like a short little idea, 2-pager, and this is the first volume. So I'm not actually in the first volume, but the project was a Saturday AM mashup. And same general idea, kind of a group of artists, kind of just riffing on different ideas, all kind of compiled together and then published as like just a little zine. My work actually starts to appear in volume 2 here. And it's specifically requested that it be as far back as possible because the idea with the strip was that it was going to deal with conspiracy and kind of alternative, strange things. And so this one in particular is about how video games are indoctrinating and brainwashing children into esoteric and occult practices. And just a quick little 2-pager. The core concept of this is pretty solid, and I've been able to pull it into 5 different chapters. But it's got all sorts of different gags, kind of different jokes in here. This was one project where I started to experiment with screen tones. And one thing I did not really know until I saw this in person was like I was drawing way too small. So the next volume and everything since then, I've had to like crank up the size, increase the text size and all that. For this project, because it's just a 2-pager, this was, I'd say 80% traditional, hand lettered, penciled and inked. I did some minor corrections in Procreate and then did screen tones with a Clip Studio. And again, like with the first project, just being able to like hold this in hand and then like look at it, kind of like point to different aspects, say like, oh, I don't like how the background turned out here, or I really like how this panel turned out here, or I don't like this combination of like over kind of rendered hat where like the light source doesn't really match and this like kind of half-ass background. A lot of these smaller things started to pop up, so I'm starting to think like, okay, like these are different areas I can improve on. And this one is set up on a little cliffhanger, so want to definitely encourage people to go read the next issue, which was volume 2. Actually, sorry, volume 3. So this one goes further into the idea that video games are kind of saturated in these strange esoteric quasi-pagan, quasi-Eastern metaphysics and beliefs. This one can actually just immediately see, like, just by increasing the text size, kind of adjusting the panels and stuff, that it's a lot more legible. But then I was also kind of struck with the idea that, like, yeah, I did more pages on this, but there's a lot of areas where it's like this white background doesn't work, it's too stark. This stuff is pretty cool, but could use a little more variance in the grays. I was also, you know, while still keeping to like the Mario conspiracy general idea, trying to play around with like different jokes and kind of different humor and stuff I can interject there. Oh, I also did the Otaku no Gaijin ad for the end of this here. So that was volume 2. I'll take a look at actually chapter 2. Because I wasn't in the first volume, my chapters are always one behind. So this is 4, so it would have chapter 3 of my strip. You can tell there's actually a bunch of different artists. This one was probably my favorite one out of this issue. Just kind of goofy idea. A bunch of rich people kind of stuck down in a doomsday bunker. This guy who drew this actually runs a YouTube kind of comic review channel, Instagram comic review stuff. And another area that I started to notice too was I did not like how stark the contrast was between black and white. And that's something that I addressed in my most recent chapter, where I switched the ink from, instead of just a straight black, it's like an extremely very, very dark, like sepia, very dark brown. And I think that it is a lot easier on the eyes. It was a lot easier for me to like look at and work on. So every chapter I was kind of making smaller adjustments, trying to hone things in. This chapter in particular was kind of a strange one, because I got up to page 3, page 4. Yep, I got up to page 3. So the first 2 pages were done traditionally, scanned in, kind of touched up, minor corrections fixed, and then tones done in clip. And I got to the end of that. Unfortunately, at the house, there was a massive storm which knocked out power. And because I basically live, even though it's, you know, the US, it's like part way a third world country, we weren't able to get power back up for, I want to say 3 to 4 weeks. The city just refused to do anything about it. So I kind of had to switch to doing digital. That might sound kind of weird because you're thinking like, why wouldn't you just keep doing traditional? But I didn't have lights down in my studio. I basically had to charge my iPad at a place down the road, and then come back after work, do all my work for basically as much as I could, while I still had a little bit of daylight and charge on my battery. I did like the digital, like purely digital workflow. It went a lot faster, I will say. The quality wise, like, it's got aspects that I kind of liked and some that I kind of don't. So I'd say it's a mixed bag. Let's take a look. There are a couple other projects I do want to show off too. So I'll show off the kind of, keep flipping through my sketchbook. Leave it right here, and then I'll grab my kind of personal Spider-Man bootleg project that I've been working on for the last year. Show off a little bit of that. So this here, these are pages. It's a little hard to see how thick that is right there. But these are, this is mostly completed. If everything goes according to plan, I should have everything inked and all the major art parts completed by the end of the month. And that puts me roughly on track to have the book completed within a year's time span. Give or take a week. The next thing after all the art assets and stuff are completed is I have to figure out how to actually design a book and put it together. This is kind of a weird idea, but it was inspired by a manga that I picked up after watching Cartoonist Kayfabe and thought, visually, like, it's pretty cool. I kind of want to do like a project that like visually matches that. So I thought, I don't want to create my own IP or spin out and have to develop like this own elaborate world for it, like just fucking rip off Spider-Man, which is what I ended up going for. So the general idea is that Spider-Man, he has a fight with Mary Jane, kind of wanders out into the night. His night gets increasingly weirder and more surreal as he has encounters with different people on the streets and, different characters he may or may not know. But this is kind of what's been taking up the bulk of my time. How my workflow works is that instead of scripting out all my projects, I'll actually just grab blank pieces of paper and I'll just start writing out notes. Here I have everything thumbnailed out. And the thumbnail and writing process, it took me about a month to do because it's not a linear process. You get ideas, you put them down. Sometimes ideas stick, sometimes they don't. You wake up a couple days later thinking like that one idea that I thought was killer is actually really stupid or doesn't fit right into the book. And I have smaller notes here, like fixed compositions on this page and page 19. Shift page 20 around so that I get like a double page spread somewhere in there. And then after the thumbnailing is completed, that's when all the actual comic creating process starts. So bust out some paper. For this project, I've been using the B4 deleter. My overall vision for it would be to have roughly digest size once it's printed. Experiment with different types of B4. So I have the deleter on top. Started getting into the IC, the one with the pink lady on the cover. Just seeing like how does this paper take, how does it take ink? Is it going to smudge? Is it going to smear? But this one, this project is still in the works. Hopefully within a couple months, I will actually have it fully available, but my schedule can be erratic at times. I'll put this back and come back. And then on top of drawing and pitching to different anthologies and stuff, at the end of the year, at the end of 2025, I had work in 10 different anthologies, 7 of which were fully printed and I actually have on hand. This was kind of a fun one. This is a little tribute zine to Akira Toriyama and Dragon Ball. I ended up doing the King Piccolo page right here. I had actually a ton of fun drawing this picture in particular. Put a couple little Easter eggs in there. I do not know anything about Dragon Ball. I've never read the manga. I've never watched the series. I basically know about it through memes. So it was kind of fun just jumping in to something that I have zero knowledge on, and kind of just playing around and riffing on that. So 10 projects in total, 7 of which I have physical copies on hand. The remaining 3 are either in the process of going to the printers or kind of just held up in production. Right now, my focus after doing my Spider-Man bootleg is the next little chapter of Saturday AM mashup, which is, as of the last issue, is getting rebranded into let's say Saturday AM mashup presents Lost Levels. So still focusing on video game conspiracies. This one's going to be a short one, so 2 pages here. Just doing little inking and stuff. Try and do, if I do a panel a day, I'll have it done like pretty quickly. That way I can just shift my focus and go back to working on the Spider-Man project. But on top of all the stuff that I have been working on, I do want to show and highlight some of the different series and books that I read and enjoyed this year. But before we get to that, the reason I did not do a recap video earlier was I was waiting on my copy of this, the KFAM Annual. This thing is a pretty hefty book. I was really surprised at how chunky this thing is. It says there's over 30 artists. I believe it was like roughly 28 illustrators and like 6 different like kind of writer helpers. So a bunch of different people worked on this. Pretty fun project. The guy who put it together, him and his wife, this guy Britton, he's actually a pretty fun guy. He's chatting with him for a moment, and he's pretty kind. And he seemed really excited for the project, and his excitement was definitely infectious, and I got pretty excited for it. So same general setup with the other KFAM stuff. You got roughly so many days to put your project together. But because this one was a lot chunkier and a lot bigger, it was I think we had 2 weeks to complete the project. And for this one, the project was centered around like an original IP or one of his original OCs. And the basic idea was that this character, Barry, goes on kind of different interweaving stories. So you have the opportunity to tie all these different artists together who are telling, different one-shots, essentially. Like this one, a lot of these run from 6 to 8 pages. I think this one's only a little 2-pager. And I've only read half of this, but you can already, looking at it, you can say, oh, it's pretty cool looking. Like, I really like this comic. I was kind of blessed to actually have the last entry, closing chapter in this before the actual closeout. And the last chapter ended up being a one-shot titled Lovely Dungeon. I took everything up to this point that I had learned just from these little projects, from working on mashup, from reading comics, kind of listening to videos, tried to put it all together into at least a coherent story. So 6 pages in total. I feel pretty accomplished about this. Looking at it now, there are aspects that I would change. I haven't actually sat down and read this since I drew the initial draft. So I'm sure when I get a little bit more time to go through and dig through it, there will be, smaller areas that I can kind of fix up and change. But that project in particular, like I was coming off of recent chapter from Saturday FM, the Mario conspiracy strip. I was coming off of 2 other projects and a couple of illustrations that I did, and I was just running ragged. I had the 6 pages due, and I was just not anywhere near having it completed on deadline. I came down to it, and I needed, I think, 2 extra days, So I reached out and said, hey man, like I'm really close to being done. Like, can I just get like a quick extension? And Britton was pretty cool about it. He said, yeah, you know, like I really dig your stuff. Like, let me know if you need help, if you can just have it in by, you know, the end of the week. So I wrapped things up. Took that extra time to kind of rest up a little bit because I think I ended up getting like a cold or something. And then sent it on in, and I ended up having the closing chapter, which I'm not sure if it's pull off or not because I haven't fully sat down and read it from front to back, but as goofy and as weird as aspects of that 6-pager, that one shot are, like I do feel very accomplished about it. And I was pretty excited to just get a copy, hold it in my hands. And if at any point, if anybody is interested, I'll put links for digital downloads and then a way to access like physical copies. You can either purchase them from me or purchase them from other contributing artists in the book. But you can look on the back, it has everybody here. So, I mean, there's boom, 8, 16, 24, 32 or so. This is a pretty chunky. This was a pretty chunky book. But let me grab some stuff that I picked up and read this year. So on top of all of the kind of indie self-published stuff, which I've been doing, I also like to read comics quite a bit. So I picked up a couple. So these 3 have been, these are actually probably the most referenced comics I've used while I've been working on different projects. Because when you work on a page or two, you know, you have your left page set out, your right page set out. You're working on the layout of the panels. You're working on the composition of the layout. And it's every page you run into a question like, how do I approach this problem? Like this panel or this page looks too boring. Where do I put my blacks? And instead of stressing out and, you know, fry my brain over hours just racking it, like what I'll do is I'll just pick up one of these. The Kirby manga is actually, the text in here is really good. I'll just pull it up and then just swipe a panel or an idea. Say, oh, you know, like I haven't drawn like a little cutesy weird character like that before. Or maybe I need to do like some big elaborate one. Or maybe I need a panel that, you know, doesn't actually have much. I need a little Ma panel, something to give my readers like a little breathing room. So having like a small little library or, you know, just different little books you can pull out and look at while you're working on your own project is actually super helpful. This series, Miss Koizumi Loves Ramen Noodles, it's all right. Once you read the first one, you've basically read them all. I think I have up to volume 4, but I mean, it's like a food comic, falls under the cute girls doing cute stuff kind of category. But even in here, you can look at it and say, oh, like it's like the artist, she's distributing the blacks on the shirt here, and then you have the blacks on the head here. You have nice harmony between the grays, whites, and blacks in this panel. So overall, everything does actually look pretty harmonious. And you start getting into smaller little details like, oh, this is like an excited face there. So we have like this flash kind of urchin in the background. Like, oh, maybe I could incorporate something like that into my comic. And so by trying to pull from different sources, it definitely keeps your project going and keeps things moving, which is what you want to be doing. Like stagnating, racking your brain and procrastinating are probably the worst things to be doing while working on any page. So these is visual resources. These 3 have actually been super helpful. Story-wise, I mean, the top 2 are kid comics. This one's a gag comic. The bottom one, I mean, there's not much to say to it. As far as kind of more fun, interesting stuff I picked up this year, Kanaoya Sachiko is an illustrator who I really like. She does Edo Gudo, but not in the typical what you would think of. And I don't encourage people to go look that kind of stuff up. It's shorthand for erotic grotesque. But her kind of interpretation of that pulls heavily from, I want to say 50s and 60s style manga. This one is in Japanese and did come with a translation book. I actually really enjoy kind of just looking at it, kind of filling in the story myself or making up a little story. That way I can focus on like, oh, how does she have that page laid out? Or look at the gradient on her grays in the background here. Also, along with picking up this, I was able to get a couple original pieces of her art, which I have in storage now and haven't actually put up anywhere, but maybe in 2026 I'll find a way to mount them, put them up. The next one, this is Ink Bottle Comics. This is Hiroyuki Imaishi's work from, I want to say, late 90s to mid 2000s. This is like a doujinshi that he put out, one of his Comic-Cat ones. And this thing is, you know, it's decently chunky. It has a good feel in the hand. You can already tell just from looking at the first page that, like, yeah, this is like a 90s manga. This guy went on to work on stuff like Neon Genesis, stuff like Kill la Kill, Fooly Cooly, Gurren Lagann. So he's a pretty incredible illustrator who also really understands the kind of movie-like or anime-like quality to manga. So this is another book that, you know, when I'm bored or if I'm curious, like, oh, how should I set up some panels? Like, I'll crack this out. And I don't have a translator for this one, so a lot of it is just kind of filling in. But in some ways, it's kind of nice because it forces me into looking more at the illustration, saying, okay, what kind of story is he telling here? And pretty funny comic overall. I think it has something to do with bounty hunters, roaming the galaxy, beating people up and capturing them for money. Not entirely sure, but still visually like really cool. As far as actual series, which I read, I found this one, Yoshihiro Tatsumi's Abandon the Old in Tokyo, from watching Cartoonist Kayfabe. They have a whole section dedicated to Gekiga. And Gekiga is kind of like a avant-garde spin-off of manga. So it became popular in the, I want to say in the 70s in Japan. So roughly from the 70s to the 80s and 90s. A US equivalent might be like the underground or alt comic scene. So stories focused, his work deals with stories focused on like working class people. But a lot of Gekiga goes into really strange, avant-garde, surreal territory. Not necessarily good reads. Usually they're pretty visually interesting. I find that his work is really engaging. I think he's a really good writer. And most of these are short stories, so 15, 20 pages or so. You have kind of like the recurring archetypal character. At first, I got to chapter 2 and 3 and thought, what is this guy doing, working multiple jobs, talking to different people as though they're family members, living in different places? And no, this isn't the same character. It's just how he depicts kind of an anonymous 1960s kind of office worker in Japan. But even looking at this, there's content here that, yeah, maybe not YouTube appropriate, definitely not kid appropriate, much more geared towards a more mature audience. I absolutely love the way he does blacks, and then his line work, his hatching is really beautiful. I had been under the assumption that he was using mostly a brush for this, although for some of the more straight lines in the background, that could be some kind of nib or some kind of pin. It also has that kind of like classic Japanese I shouldn't say classic, but kind of a stereotypical Japanese look to a lot of their faces. So if you've read Japanese literature or seen movies or books or anything that's beyond anime or manga, like, yeah, Japanese people will be depicted like that. Really love his cityscapes, how there's these like kind of cool white spaces for lights. And the cityscapes in particular are something that I swiped for the Spider-Man project. So I based the visual look of the Spider-Man bootleg project kind of off of his visual language. There's two others in the series. I want to say The Pushman and others. And one other whose title is escaping me right now, but that's all right. So, on top of reading, finished reading Dungeon Meshi. This goes all the way up to volume 14. I just grabbed one off the shelf. Really good series. I absolutely love the anime. I've watched it multiple times over. Loved all the characters, loved the story. Like with a lot of comics, if you start reading at the beginning and then really get into it by volume 4, 5, 6, the artist will kind of have solidified the look of everything she's going for. So the early chapters, the main character Laios doesn't quite match on model with the Laios of the anime or the Laios of chapter 4 and onward. Same with Marcel, same with Senshi. There's like small variations and differences here. What I love about this series is not only is it funny, but it relies heavily on dialogue and it's very exposition heavy, but it still keeps the pace of like a fast-paced comic. So there's a lot of explaining, a lot of diving into the Dungeons world and the world of Dungeon Meshi. In addition to the 14 volumes, I believe there's an adventurer's guide and then a sketchbook, which carries a lot of different works that she had put together over the years doing this. And if I remember right, this series was running for about 8 years. On the back of all these volumes, there will be fun little short chapters. These are actually my favorite part about the end of the manga. So we got one little pager, different types of mushroom monster. Here we got like the crazy broccoli monster who's all jacked. We've got the explanation of the slime. The slime's innards are actually on its outside, and it hears people making noise, so it jumps on their head. And then it reproduces by getting basically like parasitizing people's stomachs, winds up in the ecosystem, flows down, reproduces, people eat it. Really fun series. Definitely recommend it if anybody watching is interested. A series that it's actually really difficult to recommend this. This is a very difficult series to get through. I want to say 8 volumes in total. Fire Punch by Tatsuki Fujimoto. He's most famous for Chainsaw Man right now. If you've read Fire Punch or know anything about it, you know why it can be, it's not controversial, just difficult. Is extremely bleak, very dark series, but also a really kind of strange one and really engaging. When I started reading it, I probably read through the first 4 volumes nonstop, and then I had to kind of pace myself out for the rest. A lot of the twists and the direction the story takes goes in areas that are very unpredictable and very strange. But not strange for strangeness' sake. There is a coherence to the series. But it is, like I said, it's pretty difficult. Once I got to the end of it, volume 8, I kind of had to take a breather for, a week or two. Said, that's still a little too heavy for me. Gotta read something else. And this is the series that I'll finish this video on. This is one that I actually love quite a bit. I read the first volume, loved it, loved the hook about it. Immediately went out and got the second. After I finished that, drove around town, picked up the remaining 4. Volume 5 just came out recently. I believe volume 6 is going to be coming out this month. The series is called Smoking Behind the Supermarket with You. This is a kind of like an older rom-com, so demographically aimed towards boomers. Not really like a not really like an 18 or younger series. Although, you know, if you're in the 18 to 24 range, like, you might appreciate it. It's a rom-com with a bigger emphasis on the comedy initially, about two smoking buddies who meet at a supermarket, kind of their relationship as it develops. I thought this series is incredibly funny. I loved it a lot. Probably the most read one I've had this year. I've reread each volume a couple different times, and each time there's like a little subtle joke or kind of like a little image that'll pop up. Realize, oh yeah, like I missed that the first time around. Oh, that's pretty clever. The basic setup or idea is that the main character goes to the supermarket. He has a crush on, I don't know about crush. He just, you know, he likes seeing the smile of the lady at the register number 2. He one night goes, he's walking by, doesn't see her one night after a really stressful day at work. Actually gets invited to smoke behind the supermarket with one of her coworkers, who's this kind of like punkish looking girl, leather jacket, she's got piercings and stuff. So the series kind of, the setup for it's pretty brilliant because you can combine different characters in different scenarios just by having them smoke. And the series focuses on their relationship as it develops. A lot of the side characters that come in are really funny. I really like the manager who comes in. There's a lot of subtle storytelling elements, like the manager, instead of smoking cigarettes, she vapes. There's a younger guy who shows up who height-wise is actually pretty, I think he matches height-wise with the main character. They start to have like a kind of friendly relationship, which is fun. And a lot of the chapters deal with kind of like low stakes stuff. My favorite chapter, probably this one where Sasaki, the main character, he gets a new smartphone. So he doesn't know how to use a smart touch phone. So he asks his smoking buddy for help. Like, help me set it up. Other really good chapters are stuff like the back of the supermarket is haunted. That's a pretty funny chapter. Overall, just a really great series. Definitely looking forward to that one as it comes out. But for 2026, my plans right now are to finish up Saturday FM, the Mario's a Freemason strip. Keep pumping out chapters for that. And then shift my focus to completing one-shots. Right now I have the skeleton for like 10 different one-shots. Kind of hanging out in my writing folder. Of that skeleton, I've got 2 that are roughly in the thumbnail stage. So this is a 8 to 10 pager. That one would be kind of like a comedy fantasy that I want to try and complete by the end of the year. Once it gets to the stage where I have the rough thumbnails, I have all the story beats, it really just becomes a grind of like lay out the pages, panel them, draw them, do the writing. So pretty simple after this stage, but very time consuming. And then I have a script written for kind of like a short horror one. I want to say this was roughly 6 to 8 pages. This one came up initially because somebody in the Saturday AM mashup group was putting together a horror October Halloween anthology and needed just a little bit more filler. I initially said, like, let me see what I can come up with. I did not hit the deadline, but I did come up with the idea enough to where I can develop it up into a story. And then I have a couple others sitting in a folder. So for 2026, probably focusing on the Saturday AM mashup. Like I said, the Mario is a Freemason. Shifting my focus to doing one-shots and trying to put a lot of what I've learned into polishing those up, and then going around to different groups, different anthologies, trying to get them printed out and just keep on that grind. So if you've liked this video or you like this kind of, I'd say, medium form content, I don't put any production value into this. This is me speaking into a phone. I have no interest in becoming like a YouTube streamer or like an e-celeb or anything like that. If you do like this kind of content, share it. If you have an artist friend, share it with them. I know people, as they draw, you need something to listen to in the background, so any kind of ambient noise is always nice. But yeah, for 2026, it'll probably be focusing more, like I said, more of the same, more comics, try and focus on those one-shots that I have paneled out. And yeah, thanks for listening to me ramble for a bit. I'm going to go finish my cup of coffee, and you have a good rest of your day.